Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and we check out a little-known adaptation of A New Hope in this episode. I'm your host, Nathan P. Butler. We're continuing our interlude as we look at some oddball items that weren't covered the first time around as we move between the 1980s and the 1990s. This time we take a look at Contemporary Motivators, a little book by Pendulum Press from 1978 that retells the story of A New Hope as a way of featuring George Lucas as a creative mind behind this film series. Now, I've never seen one of these in person, so what I've got is scanned, printed out copies to show you what exactly it is that we're dealing with this relatively hard-to-find Star Wars collectible. It's basically a focus on Lucas. It starts with an about the author, but it's not really about the author who's actually doing the adapting. It's about George Lucas. It gives his background as of 1978. That is then followed by the actual story. And the story itself is an adaptation of A New Hope, written here by Linda A. Cadrain, C-A-D-R-A-I-N, and illustrated by Charles Nicholas. And Charles Nicholas does an okay job at these characters. Hey, Luke looks pretty much like Luke. Leia, kind of like Leia, kind of a cross between, I guess, Barbie and Leia. Ben, not too bad. Han could be just about anyone, just recognizable by the clothing. The droids and Chewbacca, pretty decently done here. And the artwork itself, fairly decently done. They do a good job of connecting the artwork with what we actually see in the film. And that was something that the Marvel adaptation did wrong so many times. Even the droids issues, where we got that Star Wars According to the Droids, where we saw A New Hope through their eyes, couldn't get some of the ship shapes right and stuff like that. So, kudos to Charles Nicholas for actually being able to do a pretty good job of adapting things here. Right down to things like, the Jawa sand crawler and the Jawas with the droids and all that outside. I mean, it was pretty well done. And we get a pretty cool, at the end, Battle of Yavin, right? Nicely done artwork. And it's kind of a cross between a comic book and prose, because you've got big stretches of narration, and then, though, whenever characters speak, you've got little word balloons and such for them to speak, just like you would in a comic book. So think of it sort of as a very wordy comic in a lot of respects. What gets me about this, though, is two things. Not four, sorry, two. Anyway, what gets me about this is, one, that this is something that is adapting the film, but it takes a lot of liberties with the dialogue, a lot of liberties with the narration. It tries to give us the story without cutting too much out, but it does adapt a little bit and leave out some things here and there, and it does change the way things are said. It's a little odd. There are certain phrasings, for instance, that you really don't think needed to be changed for people to understand it in this type of form from the film, but they are changed. It's a little bit off. It's almost like this is sort of a paraphrasing of the film rather than a direct adaptation of the film. Or you can say the adapting itself was done through paraphrasing. Either way, you're going to find the dialogue kind of feels weird as you read it. But that in and of itself is not the strangest thing. Because of the target audience of this book, and bear in mind that this did wind up becoming part of that Star Wars old school film strip, as StarWars.com called it at one point, where they take the art and the text from this and use it as a script so that they can run a film strip of basically an adaptation of the film. Another kind of neat old school Star Wars collectible out there. But because of the target audience being people that maybe hadn't seen the film or maybe weren't all that interested, maybe they're not that versed in Star Wars at the time, you get a lot of footnotes. A ton of footnotes. More footnotes than I've ever seen in anything pertaining to Star Wars, and that includes Wikipedia. I'm just going to take the first few pages here and give you some examples of these. We start out with the opening crawl, and the opening crawl in this case doesn't read quite the same. It says, "It was a time of civil war in the galaxy. The evil Dark Lord Darth Vader and his troops of soldiers were trying to crush a small group of men fighting against them. These men, the rebels, knew that the Imperial government which ruled the galaxy had grown too strong. They feared that its leader, Darth Vader, and his evil friends would try to make the people of the galaxy their slaves." Kind of interesting that the rebels are all portrayed as men, since we've got Leia as the prominent rebel leader in the film, and the idea that Darth Vader is the leader of the Empire, given the fact that we, of course, have the Emperor mentioned but not seen in A New Hope. But just in that, Lots and lots of little asterisks. Holy crap, we got one for Civil War, we got one for Galaxy, we've got one for Imperial Government. So how do they describe it? Well, it's all down at the bottom. Let's read this as you would if you were actually reading and checking out the footnotes. It was a time of civil war. Bing! A war in which a group of states or countries under one government fight against each other. In the galaxy. Bing! A group of stars and planets that form a system in space, system in quote. The evil Dark Lord Darth Vader and his troops of soldiers were, and by the way, troops of soldiers. Aren't those kind of the same thing? His troops, his soldiers. Do you really need troops of soldiers? Maybe that's just me. Darth Vader and his troops of soldiers were trying to crush a small group of men fighting against them. These men, the rebels, knew that the Imperial government, bing, rulers of more than one country or planet, which ruled the galaxy, blah, blah, blah. And that's just on the page with the opening crawl. On the next story page, they define for us what is meant by a droid and a life pod. The one after that, they explain to us what is meant by a diplomatic mission. The next page, and I like this one, it tells us it did not take long for R2 and 3PO to reach Tatooine. Once there, however, the two droids could not agree on the route they would take across the desert. They define the word route as way, direction. Really? Are you kidding me? So unless this was designed perhaps for people who are learning to read English for the first time, there's way more footnotes in this than you really actually need. And it's not usually describing Star Wars stuff, it's just vocab, basically. It is as if this was written for elementary schoolers to learn new vocab through Star Wars, like some of those step into reading books and whatnot are designed to be. A little bit on the weird side. Beyond that, though, it is a decent little adaptation. It takes a lot of liberties with phrasing and whatnot, but from an artistic standpoint, pretty solid, and one of the better adaptations from the 70s or 80s when it comes to the original A New Hope. Marvel didn't do all that great in adapting it back originally, and of course Alan Dean Foster's novel, Ghost, written under the name George Lucas, was not really all that great in fitting exactly with the film because, of course, it was being produced prior to the film. This one seems like it was produced more in conjunction with the film than anything else. So, this story, Contemporary Motivators, focusing on George Lucas's Star Wars, is it an essential read? No, of course it's not. A New Hope is an essential film. This book is not an essential read nor an essential collectible, but if you're looking for kind of an interesting, unusual way of seeing an adaptation of A New Hope from the early days of Star Wars publishing, look no further than Contemporary Motivators. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers. Ah, you see, I was gone there. Just as a special little bit here for Luke Van Horn, who's helped me on the Star Wars Timeline Gold, see the link at the bottom, quite a bit over the years, I wanted to include something that he had mentioned, but that doesn't really need its own episode. I call it the SPFX comic in the Star Wars Timeline Gold, and it's not really something that has much to it. It's certainly out of universe. It's not within the continuity or anything like that. But if you're wondering what that is, it's on the Star Wars Timeline Gold. If you're wondering what it is that Luke has been mentioning on the Timeline's Facebook page, again, see the link below. This is the SPFX promo comic that I was talking about. It's R2-D2 and C-3PO sitting around talking about an upcoming special, SPFX, the story of The Empire Strikes Back, from 1980. It was in the Sun Herald on November 9th of 1980. Honestly, it's kind of goofy. It's them just talking about what's coming up on television. But what I think is kind of funny is that if you look at it, notice R2-D2 is talking using actual words. It runs as follows. C-3PO says, well, R2-D2, Channel 7 really have a great night lined up tonight. Really have? Shouldn't it be really has if we're talking about Channel 7 as a singular, but whatever? At 6:30, Master Illusionist Doug Henning performs magic tricks you won't believe. There's a comma in there for some reason. He can even make you disappear, R2-D2, with no dash, just like in the first panel. And R2 replies, I don't believe it. Or something like that, I suppose. See? Boop. R2-D2 disappears with an eek, or an ick, or whatever the hell that's supposed to be. Then C-3PO says, then at 7:30, Luke Skywalker shows us how they did all the special effects of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. The show's called SPFX, which is a strange name, right? R2-D2 without a question mark, unless it's the fact that Luke's head is in the way of the question mark. Right, C-3PO, minus a comma, minus a dash from R2-D2. So we'll see you at 7:30, kids, and don't forget Doug Henning's World of Magic at 6:30. Okay, R2-D2?
Okay, C-3PO.
6:30, Doug Henning's World of Magic. 7:30, SPFX, The Story of the Empire Strikes Back. Said by Darth Vader, with a Channel 7 logo. Not much to it, but they are having a conversation. I guess you'd say it's sort of a miniature story, so I've tossed it into the Apocrypha section, or the in-canon section. But Luke, that's for you. Don't ever say I didn't do anything for you. Now, we'll end this episode with this quick little postscript, so to speak. Thank you for watching, and may the Force, again, be with the readers.